I'd like to welcome everybody to the meeting of the National BLM Wild Horse and Burro Advisory Board. As we get started, one of the things that we always do is if there's any veterans in the room, we'd like you to stand at this time so we can recognize you. And if you would remain standing, everybody else stand too. We're going to say the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag, to the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all very much. At this time, as we get started, I'm going to turn the microphone over to our moderator of this. Daniel is going to talk to us, Daniel Adams. So, Dan, if you would, have at it.
Morning, everybody. I'm glad to have you here. I'm going to go over a couple logistics and things for just so we can have some effective meetings today and tomorrow. Everybody should have received this sheet at the registration table, so we're going to walk through this real quick. These are what we call the rules of the room, and our hope and intent is that by everybody listening to and following these rules that it can help us to have a good meeting. So the first one is just about the seating for attendees, and that if you wish to stand, that you would do so in the standing area in the back. We want to make sure that everybody can see the board, and so if you can stay seated, that really helps us a lot. You're also the speakers that will speak later. The presenters will be at this table. Our comment period for the public comment period will be tomorrow, and we'll have a rostrum set up for you to do that. But we ask that people not come forward of this red line that's here in front of the chairs. And so you're not allowed to approach the front unless you have approval from the chair. The media, we ask that they check in at the door and that there is a taped off space in the back of the room for the media to set up. Attendees are not allowed to place microphones or cameras or other equipment in the space set aside for the board meeting. So we ask you to keep those there in the back. Number 5, all attendees will show mutual respect for each other and for speakers and the board. And this, we ask that also includes refraining from using cell phones or talking while the meeting is in session. So if you need to take that important call, we ask that you step outside. If anyone disrupts the meeting, they will be asked to leave or will be escorted out. Number 7, those wishing to address the board will sign at the door. As I mentioned, there's a sign-in space there in the back when you come in, and that comment period will be tomorrow. One thing that's so important to remember is that this meeting is for the board. And that's what we're here, is to help them and get them the information they need to do the work that they do. One of the things why it's important for you to sign up is we want to make sure when we have that comment period, that time tomorrow, we'll divide that time up based on the number of people that sign up to speak. So it's really important that if you want to speak that you do that. Attendees wishing to provide handouts to the board, that they would also leave those there at the sign-in table as you come in. Handouts will not be brought to the speaker's table, and no one will be allowed to approach the board with handouts. Within the meeting room, number 9, attendees may not display signs, placards, or any items that are likely to obscure the view of participants or disrupt the meeting. Number 10, the board will not respond to comments made during the public participation period, that being tomorrow. This should not be interpreted to mean the members of the board agree or disagree with anything said. Number 11, the chair reserves the right to comment on any factual inaccuracies that may be shared during the public comment period. And lastly, number 12, the BLM commits to maintaining these rules for the benefit of all involved and appreciates everyone's cooperation with these rules. So I think probably one thing we all share in common is we want to do those things that are good for wildlife and for the range. And so if we can all work together, I think we can have a great meeting. We're excited to get started and get going here. couple other logistics. For safety, your safety is extremely important. If there, for any reason, we need to vacate the building, exiting out the back doors here, if you go out to the left or to the right, there are exits that you can get to. For those that may need to use the restroom, we also have restrooms if you go out the door and to the left and then a quick right, or if you go past the registration desk at the front, there's also restrooms there. So, did I miss anything, Fred?
I think you've done a good job.
Okay.
Outstanding
good.
job.
All right.
All right.
Well, thanks, and we'll turn it back to Fred.
All right. We appreciate everybody coming. What we're going to do at this point is we've got some brand new board members, so we're going to take the opportunity to introduce the board to y'all. I'm going to ask each one of them to introduce themselves and say a little bit about themselves as anything that they want to say. And we're going to start over here with Dr. Barry Perryman.
How's the squelch on this? Can you hear me okay? My name is Barry Perryman. I'm a professor of rangeland ecology and management at the University of Nevada, Reno.
I'm Ginger Catherines. I'm the director of the Cloud Foundation, and I'm a natural history filmmaker. And I sound like I'm underwater.
My name is Jim French, currently a county commissioner from Humboldt County, Nevada. I'm also a retired wildlife biologist, worked for the Nevada Department of Wildlife for 34 years in northern Nevada.
I'm Tom Lenz. I'm a recently retired equine veterinarian.
I'm Celeste Carlisle. My background is in biology, and I've been a biologist for a long time. And I am the biologist and science project manager for Return to Freedom American Wild Horse Conservation.
I'm Stephen Yardley. I'm a cattle rancher from down in Beaver, Utah, and I'm representing livestock management on the board.
My name is Ben Masters, and I sit as the Wildlife Management Chair on the board.
And I'm Fred Wool, and I have the honor and the privilege to serve as the chairman of this bunch of cats. It's like herding a bunch of cats, I'll tell you. I'll be honest with you. But it's fun. It's a good thing. We're very honored and privileged to have with us today Mrs. Kristen Bale. I've known her for about 5 years, and she really has a heart for the horses. She really has a heart for the whole program, and so we're honored to have her here. She is the designated federal official, DFO, and so she's the one that's really in charge of this meeting, and so I'm going to hand it over to her and let her give you some comments this morning. Kristen, it's yours.
Thank you, Fred. And one thing I don't have is a very good voice, so I apologize. And thank you all for being here. I know some of you have traveled quite a ways, and I have always been so impressed by the passion and dedication of everyone who's involved in the Wild Horse and Burro program and who cares about the horses and the rangelands upon which they depend. So thank you for those who are attending with us today, and also thank you for those who are attending on live stream. And we have a great group of folks who travel here and do an amazing amount of setup in order to bring that live stream to you. So thank you very much for your work on that. I also want to take time to introduce Bruce Rittenhouse. Raise your hand, Bruce. Bruce is serving as our acting division chief for the Wild Horse and Burro program. He follows in the long-term footsteps of Dean Bolstad, who we were joking has been turned out to pasture. He's enjoying his retirement quite nicely, and we've been privileged to have Bruce come in and fill in behind him and help provide leadership and continuity to a lot of the work that Dean did. So again, I'm Kristen Bale. I'm the Assistant Director for Resources and Planning, but for today, I'm the designated federal official for the Wild Horse and Burro Advisory Board. And I really want to thank all of our 9 advisory board members for their service, their contribution to dealing with a lot of tough, complex, and important issues. Unfortunately, Dr. Sue McConnell, one of our board members, had a previous commitment, and she was unable to attend in person, but she is participating through the phone. And I want to thank her for taking the time to continue to participate even with the challenges of other commitments. And I also want to join Fred in welcoming our 3 new board members, Dr. Barry Perryman, Celeste Carlisle, and Dr. Tom Lenz. Thank you for joining us. Also, it does take a large team to put these meetings together, and I want to thank our Washington office, Wild Horse and Burro Advisory Board staff, and particularly Dorothea Booth, who does an amazing, she heard her voice good, amazing job in doing a lot of logistics, not only to prepare for this meeting, but to get packages ready for getting new board members and just providing an incredible amount of support. Today we're going to start 2 days of very important dialogue on a variety of issues, and this healthy, constructive dialogue is, for the board members. We have the privilege of having a variety of important presentations, and that is to inform all of us as we move forward in the program and to help the board provide their recommendations to the Bureau of Land Management. And we're continuing to look for the boards and our presenters' insights as we all work towards having a healthy, productive, and thriving ecological balance for our rangelands and our wild horse herds. One thing with our new board members, and some of you may be less knowledgeable about advisory board roles and responsibilities, and I want to take just a minute to explain those, because an advisory board is a very important and special privilege that is given because the Federal Advisory Committee Act pretty much gives boards that right to provide group advice to an agency, and that doesn't happen outside of a chartered advisory board. So a board is here to offer advice and develop recommendations for the secretaries of both the Interior and Agriculture. So we have our friends from the Forest Service who are here today providing presentations. And they provide input as to the agency's responsibilities under the Wild Horse and Burro Free Roaming Burro Act. Excuse me, I'm trying not to cough. These advice and recommendations are done thoughtfully and with the information that we provide to them in the board notebooks as well as in the presentation. And we also very much take into account the comments that are submitted to us both in person during the public comment period as well as have been sent in either through email or hard copy. Formal board recommendations are done by a vote, and that vote does not require unanimous consent. So recommendations are approved even if there's not a 100% consensus, just a majority. We do encourage that the board members work to achieve consensus, but these are really tough issues. It is tough because we all have strong, valid approaches to what should be done, and we don't always reach 100% agreement on how that's forward. But we do work very, very much together to work on those areas that we do have agreement. I call, working on the violent agreement that we do achieve in a lot of areas, and we want to continue to have that diverse, important, challenging dialogue and move together to reach consensus where we can. So it's okay where, if you wonder why we don't have unanimous votes, it's okay because we want to honor the fact that there are diverse opinions and the board can't always reach consensus. And I mentioned, advisory boards, advisory councils, and the BLM has 37 chartered resource advisory councils that are somewhat similar in their function, but they're definitely different in their makeup. They cover Bureau of Land Management lands across the West, and a lot of them also include areas where wild horses and burros occur. And these resource advisory councils, or RACs for short, consist of 10 to 15 members, and they have a very diverse composition. They can include members of tribes, members of industry, environmental groups, recreation interests, etc. And they all have a charter like the advisory board does. And one of the things that we've carried over from previous meetings is finding ways for and wanting to discuss ways for the variety of boards that we have to talk and interact, because so many of the interests intersect. Whether your interest is in hunting, fishing, wildlife management, etc. So as we move forward, we're going to continue to look for ways where we can have interaction and cross-pollination, and more importantly, also have a close tie to what's going on in the field, because the RACs are very close to what's happening on the ground in their area, and so how we can inform each other on what's going on in more local conditions. So I'm looking forward to our dialogue over these next 2 days. I'm hoping that we can build on our successes, continue to roll up our sleeves and deal with our challenges, and continue to work towards the thriving ecological balance that we all seek, but also continue to work towards thriving relationships, on behalf of the land, and very importantly on behalf of the wild horses and burros. So with that, if there are any questions from the board, I'd be glad to take them. Otherwise, I can transition to the next part of the agenda. So thank you again today.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting that we have as many people as we have here. We have an honor that we haven't ever had since I've been on the board, is we have even though he's an acting director of the BLM, he's still very important, and he's very important to the overall horse program. That's Mr. Brian Steed. And I think I'm going to let Kristen introduce him, because she would be a lot better at it than me. So I'm going to let her do that.
Well, I want to definitely join Fred's appreciation and welcome to Brian. Brian is a son of Utah. He knows Western issues. He cares about Western issues, and has been very refreshing and engaged in this program, as well as the other challenging and diverse programs that the BLM works in and faces every day. So it is my pleasure to welcome Brian Steed to our meeting, and I'm looking forward to his remarks that will soon be coming, and take advantage of this opportunity. You're talking to a leader, not only for the BLM, but a leader in the department, and a leader in the future of our wild horse and burro program. So for those of you who don't know Brian, I'm going to ask him to stand up and let folks know what you look like, and and again, so pleased to have you. So thank you.
So I noticed as I was sitting down there that there was an empty seat with my name on it, and so I apologize for not taking my respective place. By the time I realized, my friend John Bachmeyer had told me that you'd been here for less than 5 minutes and you've already screwed it up. So thanks, John. So as was mentioned, my name is Brian Steed. I'm Deputy Director of Policy and Programs, the Bureau of Land Management. Oh, thank you so much. And for the past, since about November of last year, I've been the official exercising the authority of the director. So even though my title's not acting director, I'm just clarifying. I have the longest title, I think, in Washington, which is saying something. But it's really been my pleasure to work in the Bureau of Land Management. It's a group of people that I've long admired, and it's been a really fun job. So I wanted to thank Kristen and Bruce especially for the hard work they put into this publicly, as well as all the other BLM team members that I know are here. I also wanted to thank everyone in the public for attending today. This is an important issue. It's an issue that I think inspires a lot of passion, and a lot of passion on multiple sides. And I think it's always healthy to have a dialogue in the country to where we can convene and discuss important points. And even though we may not always agree, it's nice to know that we still live in a country where we can communicate ideas, where we can discuss concepts, and we can do so in a civil and a way that we can actually come to results and solutions. And so I look forward to hearing the conversation tomorrow. Also, I wanted to give a special thanks to our advisory board members, all 9 of them. You have been given a difficult job. And I've only worked on this program in an official capacity for the last year. I started my job at BLM in October. And I have to say that it's a issue that inspires many strong emotions. And those strong emotions, I think, are often communicated towards you all. And I appreciate the time, dedication, and passion you put into this. And it's fun to see so many of you again. I've seen in my previous job when I worked on Capitol Hill, I've worked with some of you before. It's fun to meet new friends as well. And to Ms. Catherine's, I have to tell you that I was introduced to wild horses through Cloud. So as a dedicated watcher of nature, I appreciate your work on the issue as well, and to bring the issue to the American public. As you know, protection and management of wild horses and burros in the public lands is at a critical juncture. We are facing a time where no action is not an action, or is not an option, and allowing the present course is contrary to the BLM's mission. As equine populations have continued to grow, we've seen negative consequences for both the environment and the animals that rely thereon. We as the BLM need to stabilize and begin to decrease population growth on the range and eventually reach the national appropriate management levels. And we look forward to a constructive dialogue with you all on how we find action that protects both the long-term health and welfare of the animals and the other resources on the range. We're also committed to the BLM to addressing present challenges of overpopulation on both the range but also off-range, which is an increasingly pressing problem for us from a financial standpoint. And I look forward to constructive dialogue and recommendations from the advisory board on these. So I did prepare a PowerPoint, and I apologize. I used to be a university professor, and I got in the habit of doing this, so this is more for my benefit than for yours. You can see that there's very exciting slides, like this one. It is. So here's the situation. We have an on-range vision of healthy horses and rangelands, and we believe that that vision of healthy horses and rangelands equals healthy communities. And that's what we're striving for on the range. Off-range, we're working very hard to find placement into good homes for these horses after some of them have been removed from the range. And those two visions work together and can't be separated. I would also be remiss in saying this is not only the BLM's vision, but it's also the vision of the Secretary of Interior, who's asked me to engage on this issue in a very direct manner. It's come to his attention that there are many, many horses on the range. We are currently sitting at multiple times of what was deemed to be the appropriate management levels. As a result, we are seeing impacts on the range, and we're also seeing impacts on the bottom line of the BLM, where we spend an additional portion of our yearly appropriation budget on maintaining horses that have been gathered off the range. Notably as well, these visions align very well with BLM's overall mission of multiple use and sustained yield, both for present and future generations. That means it's critically important to achieve this vision for the off-range population as well as the on-range. And to do that, we're hoping to find removal or find a permanent home for all the horses that have been removed from the range. And we'll talk about some of those things today. Let's talk about consequences of overpopulation first. I think you've heard a fair amount of information on this to date. Even those members that are new to this issue know that we're facing a critical juncture, as I mentioned before, and that overpopulation causes resource degradation and affects the well-being of animals on the range. It also impacts local communities. And this is not just realized by the BLM. Indeed, Congress in the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2017 noted failure to address these problems will result in irreparable damage to the landscape and the welfare of the animals protected by the Wild and Free Roaming Horses and Burros Act. Before getting into some solutions on this, I want to talk first about some of the consequences that we're seeing on the range. This is the Pancake HMA. It's currently at 438% of AML, as best as we can tell, and it's near Ely, Nevada. The picture on the right, you can notice there's horses around a watering source keeping pronghorn antelope at bay. I wish I could say this is a unique circumstance, but indeed we have many examples of wild horses and burros keeping other wildlife from water sources or other food sources. You'll also notice that as water sources become increasingly scarce, horses are indeed trying to reach as much water as they can and will have pretty severe impacts to the springs over time. As a result of that increased competition for resources, we have noticed a decline in the health of wild horses and burros in far too many areas. This is in the Elko District of Nevada. It's the Spruce Pequot HMA. We're about 1,857% of AML currently on that HMA, and you'll notice the condition of the horses is sad. And as someone who loves animals, it's important that I think that we pay attention to the consequences of our choices as we're going forward. Also, as there is increased competition for resources, we notice that horses are not only going to stay on BLM property, but indeed will travel. And horses and burros have both sought reprieve on private property. On Antelope Valley HMA, which is 678% of HML, you'll see they've damaged horses as well as on the Go Shoot HMA. Again, these are not singular issues, but simply examples of what we're seeing in many places across the range. This has indeed led to other issues of public safety. This is the Pine Nut Mountain HMA, and this is Gardner, Nevada. And as you'll see, horses have moved in frequently to a apartment complex to access the green grass, and this creates a bit of a public safety concern as well. I actually requested the picture on the bottom left be included on this because I think it shows how close in proximity these become to human activities. And this would be different if these were domesticated animals. These are not domesticated animals, but indeed wild animals, and have them in such close proximity may create public health problems. And so that's just some of the things we're seeing. On the range vision, as I mentioned before, healthy horses and rangelands equal healthy communities. And so how do we go about doing that? Well, I would be lying if I said that there is a easy path forward. We are faced with a number of difficult choices as an agency, and indeed are turning to the advisory board as looking for good ideas on what is a pressing problems every single year. And I'll just mention anecdotally, there are two things that I view as existential threats to the BLM. This is, and one is wildfire, because we spend so much money on wildfire every year. The other is wild horses. We are on a trend line right now to where horses are consuming an increasingly large portion of our budget. And I'm not entirely sure how to get entirely in front of that in the time frame that we have. We have a budget of about $81 million per year for this program. Over half of that is spent on housing horses off range. That means that we have less money to spend. And while I wish I could say that there was some big pot of money out there that we envision getting in the future, I'm not sure what Congress will do with this information. And so my fear is that we'll be increasingly asked to consume other parts of the BLM in order to sustain this program, which I think is a frightening prospect indeed. So, how do we get there? As you all know, we have limited tools in the toolbox. One of the tools that we have and that we have used as aggressively as we can of late are gathers and removals. Gathers will remain an important part of our management portfolio. And I say that because we have areas, and this year has been particularly rough, where we have animals that are in declining health and animals that are clearly on a pathway to where they won't survive in certain areas. And so we've been instructed and have been instructing so I had a conversation early in the year with the Secretary of Interior who said, you know, if you can, we should gather as many of those horses that are on that cusp as possible. So those that are crowding out other animals around depleted water sources or those animals that are themselves in peril. We've been doing that, and that's led to a lot of emergency gathers this year, and I think it will continue to be an important management tool going forward. Also, the Secretary, so just on gathers removal, the Secretary has instructed us to look for additional means of population growth suppression. As you all know, we submitted a report to Congress detailing several options on pathways forward. One of the options that was presented there included extensive use of population growth suppression methodologies, both including temporary vaccine-based as well as spay and neuter techniques. We're pursuing both as expeditiously as we can, given the constraints that we face. And I think that both certainly have some merit. The value of both mean that the more population growth suppression we employ on the range, the less need we have for gathers and long-term holding of these animals, which is a very costly endeavor. So we look to doing more of that in the future, and we'll continue to do that as aggressively as we can. We're also engaged in an active research program to improve fertility control methods, both through vaccine-based as well as spay and neuter techniques, and I'm happy to discuss those if you're interested. And lastly, I just wanted to talk briefly on the off-range vision. We have about 46,000 horses. Well, we had about 46,000 horses in holding at the beginning of this year. Each of those horses will cost, depending on what we do with them over the time, whether they're in short-term or long-term holding, they could cost as much as $48,000 per horse for its lifetime. If you do the math on that, that means it's about $1 billion to care and feed for those horses over their lifetimes. This year, we've gathered approximately an additional 11,000 horses off the range, which means that we now have, we haven't seen the exact numbers yet on how many horses, but it's almost certainly north of 50,000 horses off range. And that means that price tag of holding those horses long term is increasing. So we're looking for aggressive means to move those horses into good homes, and we're hoping to increase adoption and sales. One of the things that we'll be pursuing in upcoming weeks and months is an adoption incentive to where we have proposed an $1,000 adoption incentive, distributed $500 at time of adoption and $500 at the time of titling of the horse at the end. So it provides the bookend to see for the year that we're seeing these animals and how they're doing. so that we're able to make sure that we abide by the mandates of the Wild Horse and Free Roam Burro Act in terms of adoptions. It's a novel idea, and some people, when I express this, look at me like I'm completely insane. I can tell you that for the average horse, that will save us about $200 per horse that first year, and not counting years 2 through N, whatever the horse's life expectancy is. So looking at that, it seems like it makes sense. The second thing we're doing in the meantime as well is increasing our long-term holding capacity for horses. If we put them in short-term pastures, or short-term corrals, it's a more expensive proposition than if we hold them off-range in more long-term pastures. So we're looking to do both those things over time. We'll be rolling out the adoption incentive this fall. We also hope to increase the number of sales to good homes as well. We've been partnering with a variety of partners to increase that number of sales and to make sure that they're going to homes that will treat them well. So we're envisioning that going forward. Lastly, we can't do this by ourselves. We're looking for partnerships with anyone who's willing to partner with us to make sure that we can maintain a viable wild horse and burro population, to maintain healthy horses on the range, and to make sure that we're able to pay for those horses that we have off range. We've been in discussions with many humane advocacy groups, as well as a variety of other groups and individuals, to make sure that we're able to meet our obligations. As I said before, we have an appropriation that's fixed on this, and so while we are as creative as we can be, we also need as much help from our partner organizations as possible. And with that, let's talk about what comes next. So the BLM is moving ahead on new and innovative tools and strategies to address on-range overpopulation and increasing placement of animals into good homes, but would be absolutely foolish to say that this is going to be easy. It will not. And we'll need to have as much consensus as possible in going forward on how we can do that. Also, we have to be mindful that this will not be done next year. This is going to take some time. It's taken us some time to get into the situation we're in, and it's going to take us some time to get out of that situation. But I'm actually optimistic. The wild horse and burro population is in many measures a product of human preference. And I'm absolutely optimistic that as we go forward and educate as many people as possible on this issue, that there are real long-term solutions for it. And I look forward to hearing from the board on what your perceived long-term solutions are, and working with you all as well as members of the public to figure out. Yeah, we'll probably have to make some hard decisions, but I'm optimistic that we can make those decisions, and that we can have a viable and long-lasting program that's both beneficial to the range as well as to the horses. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Brian. One of the things I would like to just bring up that adoption incentive program was a board recommendation back in 2015, and we're tickled to see that come about.
I read that actually, so
yeah.
I'm happy to finally see that come to some fruition.
It is, and what some of the board members, we got brand new board members, don't understand is sometimes we make recommendations that have to be applied to the government regulations, and so they might not be exactly the same thing, but they're really close. And a lot of the comments that you made, and I mean, this board stands behind that, the vast majority of the board, because we agree with what you are talking about. Does any of the board members have any questions they'd like to ask or comments?
Ben's always going to ask the hard questions.
I just want to say thank you for coming. We've never had an acting director come, and it means a lot to have somebody from the higher ups come and talk face to face, and to me it shows that you guys have a dedication to tackle this, and I hope that also exists up on the Hill as well. And that was going to be my question to you is, we've wanted to have this in Washington, D.C., just to kind of gauge, is this an issue that people really want to address? And in your opinion, is this a topic that is being discussed in Washington, D.C.? Do people really want to find a sustainable solution? Are they willing to put the money into making that happen? What is the talk on the Hill, for lack of better words, regarding this topic?
So I think it's a good question. And because of my position, I work for the administration. It's hard for me to gauge exactly all the talk. I can say that I've been asked about it many, many times by colleagues on the Hill, and there's been a real interest in how we can help this program get to a better place. And so I do think that there is interest on the Hill, and I think that there is increased awareness that the way in which we've done things in the past is probably unsustainable. And looking at that, I think that it's either going to take more money or more tools. And either of those situations is up to them. I can't make that decision on my own.
Hi, Brian. Another question, and thanks, like Ben said, for coming out here and supporting us and listening to our comments and discussion. I think it's really good to get someone in your position out here. You mentioned, though, about healthy horses, unhealthy rangelands, and then you mentioned two major concerns that you have for the BLM. One's wildfire and one's wild horses. And really the ramifications of both are major ecosystems being destroyed in situations where extensive overgrazing is occurring from excess populations of any large ungulate. But when there's a wildfire, the first thing we do is run to put it out. And yet, speaking about Humboldt County, I was speaking with Jim, and he said they had a wildfire this last year, burned over 462,000 acres. And you can imagine the type of damage that did. But we have 31 million acres that wild horses run on. And in a lot of those cases, and you showed several of them, where the populations are in excess 5, 6, up to 18, 100,
Yeah, it's
1,000.
18 times,
18 times the amount of horses that should be on there. And the amount of damage that's being done is equal to that of a wildfire. But when there's a wildfire, everyone hears about it, and there's a lot of publicity about it, and people on Congress find out about it. Is there that kind of urgency towards the wild horse program? And are a lot of the congressmen even aware as to what is going on in the West, or do they care about it? What's been your perception about that?
I think it's mixed, to be 100% honest, in terms of your second question of whether they know about it. And before this job, I worked on the Hill for 5 years for a congressman for Utah. So we had an opportunity to talk about this issue a lot with colleagues from other states, especially east of the Mississippi. And I think that there's an increased understanding. I don't think that everyone has that same understanding of what's going on with the wild horse and burro populations and some of the dire circumstances that they find themselves in. But I think that we're working on it. So to that, as to, I think that, and this is just an opinion on the difference between wild horses and wildfires. Wild horses have been much more of a slow burn, to use the analogy. And I think that it's taken some time to get to where we are. And I think that there's also a variety of viewpoints on that, on what we should do about that. Whereas wildfire, I think there's a little more consensus on what should be done. If you see a catastrophic wildfire, you fight it. Whereas I think there's less of a consensus nationwide on the wild horse program.
Sometimes the fire that burns slowest burns the most too, though.
It's true. No, and I would also be remiss in saying that the two are not completely separated. We were completing an emergency gather just this week on the very fire that was being discussed, and the reason we're gathering those horses is because that fire burned up almost the entirety of the feed. So if those horses are going to remain, we took over 800 horses off the range to save their lives.
Well, and they're also interconnected in that if you remove the native perennial shrubs and forbs and grasses, bunch grasses, and they're replaced with the invasive species, your burn cycles increase drastically from about every 50 to 60 years down to about every 7 years. So
yeah, and I think that Dr. Perryman could speak by far better about that than I could. But I will say, absolutely, we've seen that in undisturbed ecosystems where you have invasives come in, whether it be cheatgrass or Medusa head. As cheatgrass is a thatch, where bunch grasses aren't, they lay over each other and they build fuel stocks much more than they would other types of grasses, and the native grasses don't burn with that same rate that non-native cheatgrass does.
thank you.
Brian, thank you for being here, coming out to do this, getting outside and looking around, so to speak, at what's going on. And I don't know if it's a fair question or not, but it's my opinion that our challenges aren't going to be, for lack of a better word, fixed without Congress, without their active involvement. I know what's going on. I understand how things work there, and I'm not sure that Congress has the political appetite to take this up right now. It may not be because they don't want the political appetite. It may be just because they're so uninformed, and there's other things that get in the way that end up taking priority over their time. But as you show some photographs here, and many of us have been out to a lot of the HMAs, around in Nevada and other places. Some states don't have the problem that Nevada has. Nevada's the 800-pound gorilla in the room. But it's certainly, the fact of the matter is that we have many of our HMAs that overlap with a T&E species critical habitat like sage grouse, for instance. And these late season bred habitats are we are in the middle. We're not approaching it. We are in the middle of an ecological train wreck. And Congress needs to know. They need to, sometimes, I'm that way with my wife. Sometimes you have to get me and go, look at this. This is a problem here. And once you do that, we can take care of it. So, a long way to go to ask this. Do you think, in your opinion, it would be helpful from BLM's perspective, and again, maybe it's not a fair question, maybe it's inappropriate, I don't know. Do you think a meeting of the advisory board in Washington, D.C. could possibly help gin up some political appetite to have some of the folks on the Hill take a realistic, in the moment, look at what we've got transpiring out here in the West? Is that a fair question?
I'm not sure it's a fair question.
Yeah.
But can I say no? It's not a fair question. Move on.
Well, you can say
No.
it wouldn't hurt.
I would say that the more attention we can bring to this, I think the better outcomes we can see.
Okay, good enough. Thank you.
Because I think that, and I'll give a longer answer. I think that, and I'll speak like an economist. I used to teach economics at Utah State University, about 80 miles north of here. And this is it's a question of trade-offs. And the trade-offs are inherent here on what we're willing to trade off, right? And right now, I think that many people haven't ever envisioned the horse program as a trade-off, right? As something that every dollar I spend on keeping a horse in captivity over long term is a dollar the federal government doesn't spend somewhere else. Or maybe it's a dollar that we take that goes into deficit. And I mean, I think that's a trade-off that I think that it's a worthwhile conversation to have. Or the trade-offs that we face on the range, right? For every additional horse that's in the range, what that means to local vegetation or local wildlife. It's a trade-off. And I think that we have to be mindful of those things. So I think that more information is probably better. Not just probably better, more information is better.
Well, in our last board meeting we had, the board made that recommendation that long-term holding ends within 3 years, and that's part of the reason why to take that money for elsewhere. Jim, I think you had a comment you wanted to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian, once again, thank you. I appreciate you coming. You know, I'm sure you've heard a lot of these requests and concerns that has been voiced so far this morning. And I guess that's where some of the frustration comes from, is that we seem to be tasked with a job here that has no solutions, or there's no appetite for the solutions and whatnot. So it makes it a real tough lift for a lot of us. And I'm not complaining. I'm just saying that's kind of where the frustration comes from. But from the perspective, and I want to follow up a little bit on Dr. Perryman's comments about the ecological disaster in northern Nevada. We have observed, and this is a personal observation on my part, there was, following the fire borrowing and a lot of the budget support that actually happened for wildfire suppression this year. One of the things that I haven't seen happen with regard to budget support has to do with the reclamation side of it. And one of the things that I feel is one of the places I think we're dropping the ball right now is that after the fire's out and everybody goes home, gets their T-shirt and their coffee cup for the last fire and whatnot, we're faced with a reclamation disaster in many cases. And that Martin fire is a good example of that one. It's took the center out of the sagebrush or sage-grouse ecosystem in northern Nevada, took the center right out of it, that priority habitat of it. And in talking with much of the folks in the Winnemucca district, for instance, on the Bureau of Land Management, the budget support for the reclamation that needs to occur there in the next 18 months isn't there. And as you're well aware of, with the invasive species issues, we've got about 18 months in much of the Great Basin before we lose those habitats to invasive species. And I'm just wondering what your perspective is relative to that reclamation budget. I know money's tough, and that was one of the reasons the recommendation off this board for the short-term and long-term holding happened. It was try to free up a lot of those dollars that are being spent for that right now. Because aside from the horse issue, we've got an ecological disaster that is going to create much bigger problems down the road that we haven't seen.
No, and thank you for the question. And absolutely, we're aware that reclamation is an enormous priority, and we are mobilizing. When you have a Martin fire that burns 440,000 acres, and by the way, that fire was going about 10 miles an hour at one point. It's a daunting task. It's a lot of land to reclaim, and it's a lot of land to restore, but it's something we indeed take very seriously. In terms of budget support, we'll throw as much budget as we can at that. But again, we have fixed income as well. We don't, and I shouldn't say income. We have a fixed appropriation that we are where we are, and we have to balance those resources between a variety of different priorities.
Can I get a follow-up question, Mr. Chairman? I guess the point of my question was once it appeared to be that we provided the priority for fire suppression by, with regard to the support on the fire budget. And the point I wanted to make was that I think we're at a point right now where we're going to need to take a similar action in terms of budget support for the reclamation side of it before we lose it. So, thank you.
Point taken. Thank you.
Just a real quick follow-up question kind of to Dr. Perryman and Jim. As far as I've talked with a lot of BLM people, and they've told me, it's not our job to talk to Congress. If Congress is our boss, if they want to talk to us, they tell us to come. We can't go to them. But if there were a major fire consuming hundreds of thousands of acres on public lands that was occurring and you didn't talk to Congress, there would be some backlash from Congress on why didn't you inform us this is taking place. And I feel like we're in a similar situation with these wild horses. Can there be a paradigm shift within the agency to reach out and inform Congress, we've got this problem, we've got to do something about it, we're at dire economic thresholds that are being crossed as we speak?
So I have certain rules that what I can and can't do. I can't lobby Congress. That's something that I'm forbidden by law to do. What I can do is inform, though. And we take as much time as we can to inform Congress the situation we face. That is part of, it's part of why we're here today. And while this is less direct, but it's also, I spend a lot of time on the Hill talking to people specifically about this very issue and about the resource needs that we have.
Any other board member? We need to stay on time if we can. Brian, I really appreciate you coming. I know it takes an effort. I know as busy as you are, and I appreciate you staying over for the whole board meeting. It's an honor for you to be here. It really is, because I know how busy you are, and I know how important this is, or you wouldn't be here, and I appreciate it very much. And the board would appreciate interacting with you at any time. If that's okay, we'd like to know.
Absolutely, I
Okay.
welcome it. And again, I just want to say thanks to you all for the opportunity to be here, A, and B, you guys have a hard job. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the effort you put into it and the seriousness you put into it. I think it's awesome. And we take what you say very seriously. So thank you again so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. All right. One thing as we go on, I'd like to remind everybody to put your cell phones on mute. I've been hearing a ding once in a while from text messages, and that's just not fair to everybody. So if you have a cell phone, if you want to put it on mute, that's fine, but please do not interrupt the meetings with things like this. And one other thing that I failed to do, and I really apologize for this, is when I was a new member on this board, when I first come on there was two people that kind of mentored me. They were on the board and they're here today, and that is Callie Hendrickson and June Suing, and I'd like them to stand. They are former board members and helped me and taught me and did everything they could to be sure that I knew what I was doing. So June, stand up. I see you've got a tuck head, and Callie, stand up with her. And I really appreciate y'all more than you'll ever know. I really appreciate it a lot. All right. Moving right along with the board meeting, we're very honored to have with us today the state director of the state of Utah, Mr. Ed Robertson. He's going to talk to us a little bit about what's going on in the state. And so, Ed, if you would, make your way up, and you've got the floor, my friend.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Done this a few times. I know I shouldn't be walking up and talking because it's streamed, and we want to make sure the public gets to hear everything that we have to say. It's good to see some of the board members that I know, the staff, worked with June. Okay. I like leaning forward. So.
Okay.
I am Ed Robertson, the 2-year experienced Utah State Director. I moved here on October 3rd, 2016, and I am so proud to be here. I want to welcome you to Salt Lake City. I want to tell you that how much I appreciate you going out with our staff. We have some great staff here in BLM Utah. I think the trip to Skull Valley and the Anakees, Dugway. Yesterday I didn't make it, but I heard it was a really good trip. And some of the questions you asked sort of informed at least one slide that I added, and you've already gone, had a nice discussion with Brian about ecological health and restoration and how we are doing work here in Utah. I'm looking forward to spending a little time with you. I really appreciate Kristen going through the sort of the rules of what an advisory board does, and I'd like to thank you as well as June and Callie and the other advisory board members that have preceded you, because it takes a lot of dedication, personal sacrifice, hard work, and what we need in a deliberative body, it sounds like you all are providing, and that is really balanced, focused, enlightened, informed advice. And we have our own Utah State BRAC that does the same for us, and in all of our programs, and especially in our planning. And so thank you for that service. And thank Brian for taking all the hard questions. Now I know you all will be easy on me because I just have the job of welcoming you to Utah and thanking you for being here. I think we have a great state. I moved here partly because I knew that Gus War, Lisa Reed, the Wild Horse and Burro staff that we had here was top notch. And we have been challenged. I think Gus will tell you about our herds, herd management areas, our population, some of the things that we're doing to address science on the land, to look at population control and some other things that we are really working hard for here in Utah. And we have, we're fortunate enough to have 23 million acres, 22.9 million acres of public land here. It's some of the most beautiful country, I think, spectacular scenery that you'll ever see. You saw the Great Basin portion of it yesterday. You go south, you go east, you're going to see red rock, you're going to see formations, up along the river, Green River, and on into Wyoming. 32 million acres of subsurface. BLM manages for a variety of uses. These lands not only provide economic opportunity for outdoor recreation, development of minerals, grazing, but we're also stewards for managing and protecting the natural, historical, cultural resources that this state is endowed with. The administrative units that we have, you've been in the West Desert District. Yesterday you were in the Salt Lake Field Office. You see on the map that we have 4 districts, and we have the Grand Staircase National Monument. Those are the 5 line officers that report to me, and Nita Bilbao, my Associate State Director, and they are doing everything they can to manage 2 national monuments, 2 national conservation areas, and the rest of the 23 million acres of opportunity or possibilities that we have here. They support local and regional economies. I'd like to recognize Steve Yardley, who is from Beaver, and who is in one of those regional and local economies down in the southwest part of the state. And I appreciate your service on the board too, from the industry, the livestock industry, and your interest in horses and how we manage them on public lands. Since my tenure here as state director, I've really worked on following in the footsteps of my predecessors and strengthening relationships at that local level with the county commissioners, with the state of Utah, with my other federal partners. Last week I was in St. George, just south of where Steve is from, where we have the fastest growing community in the country. And we were working on how the public lands and even a national conservation area come into play when you have that kind of growth, and we are the urban interface, including Red Cliffs National Conservation Area and Beaver Dam Wash National Conservation Area, which are feeling that growth on the edge. So we're working to take care of those lands with that fast growth and ensure that that what we have at the end of the day is what FLPMA challenges us to have, which is a sustainable set of resources and lands upon which multiple uses can take place. So the economic benefits that we are able to contribute to, it's not us, we're not the industries, we're not the entrepreneurs and the public land users that help bring all that to bear, but through balanced management, we help develop opportunities for resources developing responsibly. We work to maintain healthy ecosystems. We work to ensure that there are recreational opportunities. And this state, I'll have a slide on our visitation and recreation in a moment. This state is driven by that. People move here. This is one of the fastest growing states as well, and they move here because we have things like the Wasatch Front right here at our doorstep, Bonneville Salt Flats, the deep creeks to the far west, right on the border with Nevada. We have some amazing opportunities here for recreation of all kinds. So we, in 2017, and I did bring, I'm sure that they will be handing it out, but in 2017, our economic opportunities, if you haven't been given, this is the 2018 sound investments, which I know we're going to be distributing to talk about the benefits that BLM brings to the national economy. But here in our own, oil and gas brings in $2.6 billion to the economy. We contribute to about 25,000 jobs, $4 billion in total economic output. Coal, about $750 million. Non-energy minerals, $72 million. Geothermal, wind and solar, and we've got a solar sale in process now if you're interested in investing in solar development of $24 million. Grazing of $170 million. Recreation of $580 million. And again, 25,000 jobs. So we feel an obligation to all the public of the United States, but also especially to our local state economies. I mentioned that I'd talk about recreation. In fiscal year 2017, we had almost 8 million visitors to BLM managed lands, and that is almost, or at least it is comparable to the Mighty Five. And the Mighty Five national parks put on a nationwide, I think they're a little bit saddened by the success of the public relations campaign because we have folks coming to the Mighty Five parks and loving them to death. Well, they're also loving our BLM lands to death that are adjacent to the tune of, 5,200 jobs and again, almost $600 million contributions to the economy. But we have an abundance and diversity of recreational opportunities. We've got the landscapes that you've seen and more if you come and visit or you stay a while. And we have visitors from across the world, not just the nation. We go from mountain biking in Moab, canyoneering in San Rafael Swell, river running in West River Canyon, OHV riding in the Little Sahara, which I just went out to on Monday with John Bachmeyer to show him that amazing recreational area where we get 28,000 people on Easter Sunday to come out and enjoy that play area and spend time with family on a special weekend. Driving of 9 Mile Canyon, which is abundant with petroglyphs and native rock art. The hunting in the Henry Mountains, where we have with the DNR, Division of Wildlife Resources, we have a wild bison herd. And it is also an area that John Wesley Powell thought was incredibly rough territory when he was doing his river expeditions. So we have the pride of being able to say that that's one of the areas that we manage. And our Utah RAC just approved 5 business plans for additional opportunities to collect fees and build facilities to try to distribute some of that recreation out across the state instead of having it all parked in Zion or Arches or Canyonlands or one of the parks or some of our areas that are getting increased visitation. I think those of you that have been on the RAC for the last 2 years, you know the priorities of the BLM. I think you know the priorities of the agency. I wanted to walk through them a little bit and just talk about what BLM Utah and our leadership here does to support our national BLM leadership priorities and Secretary Zinke's broad themes, the areas of focus. I mentioned job creation. You know, we're supporting working landscapes. Energy independence, we are encouraging environmentally responsible development of energy and minerals on our public lands in Utah. Shared conservation stewardship. My next slide, I'll walk into that, and that'll be, for your benefit, that'll be my last slide before I take a few questions. So I'll make a loud noise, wake you up before I get to that point. Safe borders. You know, we do an awful lot here. We do support border security with our ranger force that moves to the borders when needed to assist. But we also, you were right next to Dugway Proving Ground. You were within the Utah Test and Training Range. We have Hill Air Force Base. We have military lands here that BLM supports through our management, complementary management of areas around them. And we are completing a large land exchange on the Utah Test and Training Range to move state lands out of there so that those lands will be all public when the military does tests of missiles flying into the area. Serving America. I think the thing that I like to brag about is I think what good neighbors we are, what good neighbors we've been, how we support traditional land uses, as well as providing access for hunting, fishing, other recreational opportunities, and amazing public lands that support wildlife, wild horses, and livestock. So I want to talk for a minute about the Utah Water Restoration Initiative. This is another reason that I really wanted to move here. I had the privilege of sitting in the position that Kristen is in for several years, and I heard when I was there about the Utah WRI, Watershed Restoration Initiative, how that partnership, which started 13 years ago, was able to make so many significant contributions to the health of our priority watersheds in the state. And one of the things we do focus on is emergency stabilization and rehab. I'll talk a little bit about this, Jim, with regard to, you know, it's an all hands, all lands approach. We are really we're providing continuity on the ground for these activities. We're working as good neighbors with others to pool together our resources to focus on the highest priority activities and projects, and to reduce administrative redundancies, barriers, and increase efficiency and effectiveness of our implementation. It is a seamless partnership. You can go on the Department of Natural Resources WRI website. My good friend Mike Styler, who's the executive director of DNR, he's going to be talking with you later this morning. It was his department and the Division of Wildlife Resources that actually is the focus of administering WRI. The website is amazing. It gives you an idea of every project that we're considering. It talks about the partners. It talks about how we're improving our restoration activities. And over the time period of the last 13 years, we've treated 1.4 million acres. 400 miles of stream restored to proper functioning condition. We put healthy watersheds and landscapes. If you drive through this state, you will see some pinyon juniper woodlands that are a monoculture. And then you'll start to see islands of that pinyon juniper that has been converted back to a sagebrush sea, to productive rangelands and shrublands that are going to host the sage grouse as well as 350 other obligate species, as well as providing healthier lands for our wild horses, our wildlife, and our livestock, and opportunities for our public here and the visitors to go out and see an intact landscape that is more of a mosaic rather than a monoculture. So we are really proud of that. In FY18, we added a project that's going to help the issue that Brian showed you, where you had antelope standing waiting for horses to finish drinking water. We put together a water project proposal that allows folks to say, I've got conflicts here, I've got areas that I could do a better job of moving my animals out or moving wildlife or horses out of an area that's being heavily impacted, so we can get restoration of the area and really try to move water to places where the animals can use it and get it out of areas like riparian areas. So in the 13 years we've spent collectively, and that's all of the folks, there's about 100, 150 partners that do it, about $207 million. I said almost $1.5 million million acres of treatment, $24 million of in-kind contributions from our partners, and this year alone we've treated 110,000 acres. And we are really heavily focused on ESNR on those fires that have hit us. So I think I'll stop there, but I want to thank you for joining us in Utah. I'm just work a block over here in Gateway Mall. If you all decide to come by the office, look forward to engaging you on this issue that I put a lot of heart and thought into while I was in Kristen's position. And you know, we're proud here, Gus and Lisa's leadership in the program. We have a great adoption program, great public relations with folks, and really enlightened management. Abby Josie is our Deputy State Director, who also provides leadership, and I think knows one or two of you from her days in Nevada. So, Mr. Chair, that's, you know, I could go on and on and on, as Ginger knows and others, but I'll stop.
Thank you, Ed. I had the privilege to meet you in 2014 when I first came on the board, and it was I was impressed at that time, and I haven't changed my opinion of
well, thank you.
What you do. Does any board members have any questions for him?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, no.
Hi.
Oh, no. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for your work on the board in the past. I was sitting out there then, and just really appreciate it. And we had a great tour yesterday with Gus and Lisa. And at one point, Gus showed us the kiosk and the signing for Anarchy and the rules of the HMA. And do you have plans, perhaps, for doing that for all the HMAs in Utah? Because people really love to see wild horses, and if the signage is there, that would be great.
I think Gus is going to talk to you a little bit. I can let him.
Okay.
I'm getting kind of the
evil eye?
Yeah, well, I want to keep you all on schedule, but I know Gus can answer that question, and I think it is a great idea. We have My granddaughters were here over the summer, and we went down through the San Rafael Swell, and we got to see some of the Sinbad burros out there.
Wonderful.
And they lived on Fort Irwin. They got to see some of the big burros that we have out in the desert. And it always helps to have some interpretation so that you know what you're seeing.
Yes.
You know. So,
Yeah, couldn't agree
so I
more.
agree with
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you, Ginger. Anybody else? Stephen?
One quick question, and thanks for coming. With all the abundant activities and economic outputs that transpire under the direction of the BLM within the state of Utah and the massive amount of lands that you have to manage, where do you see the excessive numbers of wild horses and the ecological damages occurring in your long list of problems and priorities? Where does that line up on that list?
Well, I could answer. I would rather Gus answer, and I think you're going to hear from Mike Styler, Executive Director. We've had some areas where there's so many wild horses on private land, up in the basically up in Tavaputs and in those high areas in the Book Cliffs. And DNR has helped us help fund some of the passive gathers that we had. Because you had private landowners who haven't used their land for grazing for 15, 20 years because of overpopulations of animals there. We have other areas like that, and when we have drought and water shortages, and we have 3 times over AML in the state, we really have tried to be strategic and focus on, where do we go? And in Beaver and Iron County, we were doing a gather there 2 winters ago. We had so many horses. We had horses out there in snow up to their chests. It was a hard thing to do. We couldn't get them out because of the snow, and so you've got, and again, I'll let Gus, if you wouldn't mind, let him give you the real lay of the land and what our plans are. Is that?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Ed.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Board, our next speaker is a gentleman, and I'm looking here at this board, and I see V. Gus War, and I've known Gus for a long time, and I didn't know he had a first name that began with a V. So one of the first questions I'm going to ask him before he gets started, what does that V stand for?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The V stands for Victor. So
Victor.
If you ever hear Victor War, that is the same person
Okay.
as Gus.
All right.
So,
All right.
And A stands for August. So Victor August. Well, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I was just looking at this, and I was trying to figure out how the pointer works when you guys are looking at that. Any idea? Oh? They won't see it on there. Okay, perfect. Well, hopefully.
Oh, that pointer.
Yes,
oh, I
that
thought
pointer.
You, meant
You
the
have a
button.
screen in
Oh.
front of you,
Oh.
but that's all good. Well, thank you. We had a great trip yesterday. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I'd much rather be out there with you kicking around in the soil and being with the horses, but this is a great environment. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your willingness to serve on the board. I think you feel a little bit of the struggle and the challenge that we have as BLM employees, because we get, at times we get venomously attacked, other times we get praised, and we have to take it in stride. It's a challenging program, very emotional program, but thank you. And like I told you yesterday, welcome to Utah. I'm a Utah native, born and raised, and Washington will never get me anywhere outside the state, so you're stuck with me here. I can talk about Utah for hours and days. I love the state. Spent the last 28 years with BLM in the Wild Horse and Burro program, so I know quite a bit about the state of Utah and their horse program, and hope to really go a deep dive, because those of you that are new on the board, one of the opportunities we get as program leads for individual states, when the board comes here, we get to tell you everything we can in a short period about our program in the state. So I'm going to go deep dive into Utah's Wild Horse and Burro program, tell you what I've learned over the last 28 years about individual HMAs, challenges, successes, and hopefully, I don't see a clock, throw something at me and shut me down for some questions. Perfect, okay, all right. So as you saw yesterday and has been talked about, you know, one of the things I always have to tout is we have an amazing wild horse and burro team here in the state of Utah. And it's not just at the state level, it's clear down to the field level. We are small, we're a small state. We only have 2 full-time wild horse and burro specialists in the state of Utah. We have 3 other individuals scattered across the state that are called dual hat, meaning they work in the wild horse and burro program, but they also have other duties. They work in the range program, they work in, you know, the weeds program, whatever it may be. We have 3 facility folks that work at our Delta facility, 2 at our Delta facility, and 1 at our Axtell contract facility. We have wonderful full-time public affairs officer, Lisa, you got to meet yesterday, and many of you know. And, you know, we have, what makes our management team so successful is our managers, just like Ed, you know, what amazing guy, clear down, you know, Abby, to our field managers, district managers, they support us as a team, and we're able to get things done, and I'm very proud of that and being able to continue that coordination and work. At our facilities, we have a little bit of everything in Utah. We have 2 what we call off-range corrals. We have our Delta facility, which is a BLM facility. It's a 300 animal facility, and one of the reasons that is because it's inside the city limits of Delta, so it's limited on the size. And then we have our Axtell contract facility, and that is actually 2 parts. We have a burro contract and a horse contract facility. One is for horses. It's capacity-wise, it can hold up to 2,000 animals. We have a contract right now for 1,000 animals for that facility, and we have a burro facility that is a 1,200 head facility, but it's actually part pasture and part corrals, and that's the only one in the country. There was a need a few years back, and the individual applied and was awarded that contract. Very, very well-run program. And, you know, we do have an off-range pasture, a small one in central Utah in Fountain Green. We have about 350 mares there. So besides those that are in the Midwest, we do have an off-range pasture in central Utah. We have 19 herd management areas in the state, and I'll go through them really in depth here coming up. But we have 19 herd management areas that are taken out of management within 29 herd areas, and I'll go through that. 17 of those are wild horses and 2 wild burros. So we have a little bit of everything, which is very fun. This is kind of a wide shot map you're looking at in front of you, so you can kind of compare Utah to maybe the borders of Nevada and Wyoming. Now, bear with me, I was going to ask Lisa what color those are, but the blue or purple ones are the herd management areas. I'm colorblind. And the red ones are the herd areas. And so you can see we have a little bit, you can see our composition of our 29 herd areas, and within those 29 herd areas we have 19 of those that we manage animals at. I'm going to move forward and kind of, so if you look at like over on the right-hand side, well, let's deep dive into some of these. Let's jump into, I'm going to focus in on like northern Utah. On the far right side of your screen, you can look at those Bonanza, Hill Creek, Winter Ridge. Those are herd areas. Now, those are herd areas that create their own challenge. That's an area that we've had. Those of you that are familiar with equine infectious anemia, that's what you test for Coggins test for your horses. That is one of the few, there's only a couple that's ever been documented within BLM that we've had equine infectious anemia on the range. And we actually partnered up with the state of Utah and the Uinta-Ouray tribe back in 1998. And between 1998 and 2006, we did some extensive gathers and testing. And we actually had to, we gathered a lot of animals, and we actually identified 98 individuals that were positive for equine infectious anemia off of public lands that had to be euthanized in that period. Very unique, very, something that others don't deal with. In 2008, the land use plan in that area designated those as herd areas because of the issue of not only the equine infectious anemia, but we have a lot of tribal land over there. There is literally right below Hill Creek there, you can see some tribal land. There's estimates to 2,000 plus horses on the tribal land that go back and forth onto BLM. Very challenging area to manage over there. We do have the Hill Creek herd management area. You can see that has a jagged boundary on it within the HMA there. It's because we actually did a deep dive and figured out, okay, that's really the area that we manage it in. the horses don't go, that was just a circle on a map at one time. And so we've been able, through some of our land use plans over the years, to really focus in on where can we manage them effectively. If you move over to the left side, that's where we was yesterday, the Anarchy herd management area. You can see that the original herd area of the Anarchies is quite large. On the far west side or the left side, though, a lot of that area has no water sources. And then you get up into the military land. And so we, as an agency, we had to go and identify, okay, this 200,000 acres is what we can effectively manage on the Anarchies. Now, the Anarchies, as you saw yesterday, is a challenge by itself because of the visitation. Both Anarchies and Cedar Mountains, you have that military component to deal with. So each one of these zones within Utah has their own management challenges and opportunities. When you go down into the southeast part of the state, we have the Muddy Creek and the Simbad, Canyonlands areas that we manage animals on. You can notice the Robber's Roost. Robber's Roost is an area that was originally designated as a herd management area, but there's not effective water there. We couldn't keep a population of 25, 30 animals there because there just wasn't water. We were continually dealing with animals that were going without water. They were being compromised. And so that in 2008, our land use plan went through the public process and determined, okay, we can't effectively manage horses there. There's still horses there. In fact, most of our herd areas have horses. You look down onto towards the grand staircase that Ed talked about down on Harvey's Sphere. There's actually horses down on Harvey's Sphere. There's about anywhere from a dozen to 2 dozen animals. Very remote population, kind of self-regulating through land predation. But it's in an area that we really can't effectively manage. So it's one of our herd areas that we just really can't effectively manage. So it's not a herd management area. On the southwest or the western side of our state is probably our largest component for managing wild horses and burros in Utah. Everywhere from the confusions in the Anarchies, the Congers, down into the Cedar City area. We have quite a large number of herd management areas, and you can see most of those, the herd management areas boundary is the same as the herd area boundary. They're actually going through a land use plan right now to evaluate, the ability to manage all of those populations. We've been partnered with our partners with the USGS and Colorado State to do some research on the Congers and the Friscos, and I know Paul's going to talk a little bit about that. That's where our gelding study is going on, and we've had some great research there. Also over on Simbad with the Burros, we've been doing research there, so we're very active in trying to improve our knowledge of how to better manage the populations. Here's some specific numbers. Now I apologize to you board members because I think the slide you have in front of you, these numbers, I adjusted them just a little bit, or I added some, put it that way. But as of 2018 March, if you look on our national website, we roughly had 5,100, 5,200 animals in the state of Utah. That was definitely down from 2017, which we were at 5,800 roughly. Today, as of right now, I estimate our population in the state of Utah to be about 4,842 animals. Now that's an estimate. It's not 100% accurate. I could probably say it's plus or minus 15% either way, real easy. And that would consist of about 4,800 horses and about 344 burros. We have been very active in removing animals in 17 and 18. We removed about 1,000 last year and a little over 1,100 this year. But if you look at our appropriate management level is just under 2,000. So even though we've been actively removing, actively trying to do the best we can, we're still about 2.5 times where we should be. We're definitely not as bad as some states, but we've been trying. We've been very effective in some areas, but we have a long ways to go. In managing horses here in Utah, I've found, we can be the best managers in the world, but this right here is a key factor that's going to drive what we do and how we do it quicker than anything. And we, like I told you yesterday, and thank you for bringing the rain with you, because it's October 1st hit and it started raining. We pretty much had 4 months of dry nothing in Utah, but you can see based on this current drought monitor, we still, Utah, Colorado, there's a big blob right there of really crucial drought-stricken, actually the whole West the whole west, that's a drought monitor. So if it's white, then you're not in a drought. But you can see the whole west is still in a drought condition, and that right there really dictates in a big way what we do and pushes us in one direction or another when it comes to the long-term management. We deal with the water issue every year on many of our HMAs. This is just a slide I pulled in 2016. We had so many horses that were standing around without water. It was either bring water to them or they were going to start getting compromised and we were going to have to do an emergency removal. Most of our herd management areas, not all, but most of our herd management areas, the forage isn't the issue, it's the water. And you'll see that a lot in the west. We try to improve these water sources so we don't have to haul water. These are just some examples of, water catchments, ponds, cleaning them out, doing that simple maintenance that doesn't take a lot of effort and money, but it's very effective, putting in water troughs and storage capacity to keep these horses and burros so that they don't get into those compromised conditions in these drought periods. The Muddy Creek Herd Management Area, we just did a gather this summer there, and that's a very challenging area. That spring source on the left that you see, that's a spring that we deal with every year that it only sustains maybe about 25 or less horses. When we get more than that, the spring starts drying up, and literally it's been, for the last 5 years, it's been an annual process of going 3.5 hours into this, making sure the horses are okay. And we've had to euthanize horses probably every year for the last 5 years that get into body condition 1 where they just can't walk. And I'm not gonna drive into an area and see a horse that's in that body condition and not fulfill our duty to relieve that suffering that's going on. And it's a challenge. But then when it rains, things like on the right side happens, little rock caverns fill up with water and the horses disperse, and they're great. So if we get those rains, that climate allows us to have those rains, a lot of these problems kind of dissipate. But the long-term solution is, really trying to keep these numbers in check. This is some of the signs that Ginger talked about, and I'd love to answer that question, Ginger, right now. These I think are critical in our future management to educate the public. I'm a big component of education. This talks about the Onakis, on how they're being loved to death. People are going out, and I love the fact that they can walk out amongst them and be close to them, but when they start petting them and feeding them and making pets out of them, that's the concern I have. And these kiosks that we've built, I'd love to see them all over the state. I'd love to see us continue to educate. We have some interest in other herd management areas where we're going to put this out there. And we noticed yesterday that this has been up for 2 years, like hopefully in the other van might have not heard it. There's no bullet holes in it. So that's telling me that the public likes it. That's great. The Onaki HMA, it's when you have large numbers of horses like this that are that approachable, it creates challenges. But we have a lot of partners. I just threw up a couple of partnerships here. They're not all of them, but we partner with the Mustang Heritage Foundation, and this is the Impact of the Horse we do every year. If it was in November, we would invite you up, where we have a competition between adopted Mustangs and domestic horses, and it brings the two horse worlds together. And we've been doing it for the last 6 or 7 years, and it's fantastic. We have hardcore domestic horse owners that are now adopting Mustangs because they're blown away on what they can do. We have a partnership with the local zoo here on the Wasatch Front that are displaying some of our animals, where we have thousands and thousands of people visiting Hogle Zoo. They come in and they look at that and they're like, I didn't know there were wild horses in Utah, or burros. And so we have a display every year at the Hogle Zoo. We have an adoption festival every year that we've been doing for 20-something years, I believe. We had our 20th anniversary, where we have not domestic, it's only BLM adopted horses. They have to have a freeze mark on them. They come and compete. And we have started our 4-H program. We're into it about 3 years now, where these youth programs, we have 3 of them we do, and they're just great partnerships. And we love the partnerships. We love our partners that we work with. And it's a challenge with the program we have, but the satisfaction we get as a team to see the success is just well worth the effort that we put in. But we have some great partnerships. Now, I've listed some of the challenges here. You can look at your books, and you can ask any questions. But I threw this up to just generate maybe some questions. We're 2.5 times AML. We have several that are 4 or 5 times over what we should be. These extended drought periods that we're having, they're killing us. I mean, the water limitations are killing us. This water shortage issue, it's, we've talked about it amongst ourselves. Maybe we need to go back and look at some of these AMLs, because if we don't have enough water to sustain these populations, do we develop more water? Do we reduce the AML? What do we do? But these water shortages are tough to deal with. And then this program-wide for Brian and everybody, this program-wide budget limitation where other states maybe are taking the opportunity to do removals, maybe Wyoming's going to get it or Nevada's going to get it, then that means the other states are not going to have that opportunity to remove the animals that they should be. And so the trickle effect is the states that aren't on the high priority, they kind of get left behind. I know Nevada was in that mode for several years, and Nevada's in a tough boat right now because they were kind of just pushed aside, and there was a lot of other issues that were being dealt with. And then, the increase of private property and public safety concerns, those are real live big things that we deal with on a sometimes weekly or monthly basis around the state. So that's what I've got. I hope I left some time for questions.
You did. You
Good.
did. Because even if you didn't, we were going to ask some.
All right. I love it. I would rather just answer questions.
One
Perfect.
thing I'd like you to do, because we have some brand new board members.
Yes.
Can you explain the difference and what goes into being an HMA and an HA?
Yes, correct. So I'm just going to quickly go back here. So a herd area is the original 1971 designation. So if you look at the Onaki herd area, that's the dark red line. The herd area was what BLM had to go into after the act was passed in 71. There was a period between roughly 73, 74, 75, where each BLM district had to go out and identify where wild horses or burros were found. Sometimes that was done on the ground, sometimes that was done in a helicopter, sometimes that was done in a fixed-wing airplane. And the BLM staff went out and literally made a circle on a map in a lot of places and said that's where they were found. Then after that, BLM had to go through their land use planning process and identify within that herd area where can we effectively manage those animals as an agency. And so you can't have a herd management area that goes outside of a herd area because of the law. A herd management area has to fall within a herd area. Hopefully that makes sense. And so thus we have the herd management areas are always a subset of a herd area, or it may be the same boundary. A lot of our herd management areas on the southwest part of the state, it's the exact same boundary. Yeah.
One other question
Yes.
I want to ask before I turn it over to the other board members is that I don't get on Facebook very much. I've got grandkids and I do that, but I've got a good friend. His name is Abraham Lincoln. He's a Facebook friend, and he said everything on Facebook is true. And so recently there's been some Facebook posts about a gather that occurred here in the state. And
Okay.
I've known you a long time, and some of the comments that was forwarded to me was not very flattering, and
Sure.
I want to know if you would mind sharing that.
I would love to. Every time we do a gather, every time we do an event, there's things that pop up like that, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate bringing that up. We did talk about this a little bit yesterday, and I addressed it by some people because, we had a gather that was called the Muddy Creek Gather, and we were down there gathering. We removed about 150 horses. We had a situation where we had some very passionate people that were there. They loved their horses, and I love that about this program because people are so passionate and they love their animals, as do we as BLM employees, but we had the need to remove some animals. They were so upset that it started getting a little rambunctious, and we have a great law enforcement team, and I was the incident commander there, and I asked our law enforcement person to go up there and say, just go make sure everything's okay. Just be a presence there, which he did. The gather proceeded, and it was all great. Well, that evening, all of a sudden, the Facebook posts started showing up in the Twitter feeds about how Gus War was out there making fun of people as the horses were coming in, and how he was, as people were crying, which they were doing, I was making fun of them, and it's like, I wasn't even up there. I was at the gather, but I was down where the law enforcement person was, and I'm like, it's unfortunate that people have so much passion that it takes them down that road of being dishonest and trying to smear somebody personally. It's really a sad affair that when people get to that point. But that was the situation. I've dealt with those I don't know how many dozens and dozens of hate mails and threats and you should do this and that. But, that happens, and I wish people would just educate themselves on the truth. Social media is just a lot of times a venting point, in my opinion, for people's passion and emotion. I would really caution people to watch what they read and get the facts before they jump into that. So that wasn't the only incident, but we could go all day. But that's the one probably we're talking about, I would imagine. So
Well, the one that, when that happened, and because I've known you for quite a while, and I don't know anybody in the program that has more passion than you.
Oh, thank you
for these horses. So,
thank you.
Any other board members have any questions for Gus? Ben?
I actually have two questions
perfect.
for you, Gus.
Oh no, he can only have one. No, I'm teasing you.
The first question is, can you give us a synopsis, or do you have any data of the amount of horses that are outside of the HMAs and the HAs?
Yes. So on our statistics, if you go into our national statistics, you can look at the herd areas. And so are you talking outside of the herd area boundaries? Correct. Okay. I would guess out of the 5,000, 4,800 animals that are in Utah, we probably have about maybe 300 to 400 of those animals are outside of the herd area boundary. And then, we have that subset of 800 to 1,000 animals that are within herd areas. So, that's a big problem that we deal with. When the populations expand, they go somewhere, horses or burros don't understand that they have to stop at this line. And so they go outside. So it can be quite significant. But it's definitely a subset of that number that, there's some quite a few animals that go outside of, and they're just on public lands. And I've been asked, do they fall under the Wild Horse and Burro Act? Dang right they do, definitely. They still fall under the act, although they're just not within a herd area or a herd management area.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then my second question is, yesterday you mentioned mountain lion predation, and today you mentioned mountain lion predation. I'm not familiar with any data or studies that come out of Utah that support those claims. Do you have that information available?
I work with Dr. Peterson that actually is going to be here, and he actually is very knowledgeable about the data on predation. I would probably kick that to him because I don't know of any studies. We had the incident we talked about in the mid-'90s, late '90s on the predation on the Onakis. I don't think there was any studies or data on that, but Dr. Peterson is very influential and knows the predation topic, and I think that he might be able to tackle that one for us. So.
One other question I had, and it was one that I asked Director Robinson, but he kind of said he was going to defer it to you, and so I'll just go ahead and do that.
Perfect. I don't remember the question.
Where is, there's a lot of activities, economic activities, and different things going on with BLM ground within the state of Utah, and it's a large area. As far as on the list of priorities and problems that we're faced with, where is the overpopulation of the wild horse and the ecological problems that are occurring because of that on that list?
I would say since Ed came to Utah as our state director, he understood the program, which was very fortunate for Utah. It's not uncommon for me to get to my desk at 6:30 in the morning and Ed calls me on the phone and wants to know what's going on in the whole program. So if the state director is calling me personally, I think that's pretty high on his priority, and I really think, Stephen, that he has made this program a priority in his tenure as a state director to try to do his best to work with the state, to work with SITLA, to work with the livestock community, the interest groups to make this a priority program, and I think it is up. It may not be number one. Couldn't tell you what's number one on his list, but it's up there. It's definitely high.
All right, thank you.
You bet.
Tom?
Gus, I want to thank you for the tour yesterday. That was very educational.
You bet.
Are all the horses, as they're removed, tested for Coggins?
Yes. Every horse that is removed from public lands, when we take them to our facilities, go through a health inspection, and they'd have a blood test tested for equine infectious anemia. Yes.
So in the case of that herd where you had all the reactors, do you go back into those horses that are remaining and periodically test them?
So not on a regular basis. The challenge we have over there, Tom, is the fact that they go back and forth between the tribal land. And anytime we do a gather, though, we have an agreement with this Utah State veterinarian where when we gather those horses, we literally have to test them on site. So we won't ship them to our facility. We have to hold them on site and test them. And if we have a positive, then we go through a quarantine period on site where we've spent months in quarantine on the public lands. And so, but it's kind of it's a very rare isolated case. But anytime we go into there, we have to hold the animals and test them. So.
Good, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Gus, first time I met you was yesterday, and your reputation precedes you for sure in terms of your passion for the job and whatnot in the Nevada side. I had some folks ask about you when I was talking about this schedule, and state of Utah is lucky to have you. I'll just say that right now. I would. In fact, Ben asked one of the first questions having to do with mountain lion predation, and I'm going to go ahead and defer to that. But I had a couple other small questions. I was wondering on the 1,100 or so that you gathered this year, were those gathers based on emergency conditions, or were they scheduled ahead of time?
A couple of them were emergencies. One of them was most of them were scheduled, but we did have one private land gather where we had a large number of animals move on to private land. Actually, a couple of them, they're small. The one was an emergency. We did do an emergency removal on the Cedar Mountain herd management area because of lack of water. And it wasn't the entire HMA, it was the southern part where we had 3 springs that were drying up, and so we removed 175 animals off of an emergency gather. The rest of them were planned gathers that we had worked with Washington to get approval and get those on the gather schedule.
Okay, great. The other real quick question I had, you mentioned the 4-H program for on the adoption side of it. Do you have a name for a lead on that? That's something that
on the watershed, the restoration that Ed talked about.
On the 4-H program, that interface on the adoption side of it, you had that one slide having to do with 4-H program.
The show.
Oh, the horse show.
Right.
Yes, I know. Now, if I said 4-H, I might have misspoke.
4-H.
4-H. Yes. Yes. There's several. Idaho's doing a 4-H program, and we can actually we've been encouraging the other states to do something similar. Idaho's kicked it off, and now we've got multiple states that are doing this same program, and it's working really good. And yeah, we could hook those 4-H leaders up and get them in contact with one another.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that because Nevada's not one of those states that's doing that, and I think there's a great opportunity.
It's a golden opportunity, and it's such a good program for the youth. It's just great.
Yeah. If you wouldn't mind, could I get you to forward some of those contacts to me?
Definitely.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Help me with that, Lisa.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Ginger?
Hi.
Hi, Ginger.
I so regret what our chairman referred to on Facebook. Because I've known you for a very long time, and I can't imagine that you would ever do anything like that.
No,
so I regret that. I'm not a Facebook follower. I don't have enough time to do Facebook. On the 4-H, wonderful.
Thank you.
In Colorado, just FYI, Steve Leonard in Colorado was working on that 4-H interface, and he's very excited about it, and a dedicated BLM employee. And then just on a personal note, when I adopted my Swayze Mustang, the BLM was kind enough to even bring it to Grand Junction so that I could pick him up. And he's nearly 16 hands tall.
Oh, wow.
And so you didn't tell me that.
Everybody wants a 16-hand horse.
Not me. Thank you, though.
Thank you, Ginger.
I can look at.
Perfect. Mm-hmm.
Try it now. There we go. Okay. You mentioned the drought monitor. How are you using the drought monitor in your decision-making process?
Yeah. One of the things I encourage our field specialists to do is not only when they're doing their analysis on whether to do a gather or not, when they're determining determining excess population subsequent to whether we're going to do a gather, I encourage them to use this extensively. This has got to be part of the analysis. I encourage them to look at not only our utilization, our trend, our population numbers, but use this drought data because it's very predictable and it predicts, wow, look where we're at right here. And you know, this can really maybe answer some questions why we have no vegetation growth this year because of the lack of water. And also we have local rain gauge data that go along with this, local climatic data that we use.
Okay, the reason for the question is the drought monitor is based on surface water availability.
Okay.
And so there are some years where you can have all kinds of feed on the ground. But you just there's no water, basically. So
Right.
as long as your staff is cognizant, I can't even say that word. That's a big word for
Yep.
me. As long as they realize what's
Yep.
going on,
Yep, definitely.
it's okay. But we've had some issues where some of the BLM offices have been relying exclusively on the drought monitor.
Right,
and-
that's a
and
mistake.
It can be completely off
Definitely.
base.
I would
what's
totally agree
going
with
on
you.
on the ground.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's just just one glimpse. They have to look at that local data, that local, you know, trend monitoring data, you know, utilization, all of those other factors. So that's a good point. Thank you for making that.
Woke up over here.
She finally come
Well.
awake and she has a question she wants to ask.
Welcome to the board, Celeste.
Thank you, Gus. Yeah, you can hit him. I'll get him myself later. Anarchy is looked to as an example for a really workable and successful fertility control program in that you have approachable horses and you have a team that is supportive of doing this, including your state lead. And that's really important. And so I know that other field offices have looked to you for advice and practicality and the do's and the don'ts. But then also, as you're building and scaling up a project with such approachable horses at Anarchy, and you all are darting roughly 60, hoping to up that to whatever.
Sure.
How are you formulating what are your limitations for attaining 60 at this point instead of, say, 100? Or are there reasons that you're not just going out and let's start all the mares or
Okay.
80% of the mares or whatever?
Very good question. You know, one of the biggest challenges we have right there is, okay, we do have that, what we call the mob, the large group of horses, and those are very approachable. We do have a lot of subpopulations on the Anarchies that aren't that approachable. So there's a big subset of those Anarchy horses that right now we can't approach them that close. But you know, one of the things we addressed, and we did that this year, is we did not have enough darters. We just had a training this summer where we had another half a dozen individuals take the training, and they're ready to go. The identification of the individual animals is always a key. You know, making sure that you have that database and making sure that you can identify each individual mare so you know which animals you're treating. We just don't want to haphazardly go out there and just start darting any mare we want, because we need to know when it was treated and how often. And so we want to be very precise in what we do. And so I think our limitations are very minor on the Anarchies. The limitations that we run into more are the other herds. But we're actually looking at, on the Muddy Creek, for example, we have a subset of that Muddy Creek herd management area that are very approachable. So we're going to try to do some remote darting in that. There's a lot of the areas within Muddy Creek you can't even get a mile from them. But you know what? Take what you can get. I think that, you know, any kind of population growth suppression is going to support the program in the long run, and I'm encouraging our field folks to take advantage of that. You bet.
Just one quick one, if I could. In like the McCullough Peaks, which is, you know, I think it's about 120 or 30,000 acres. Those horses were just like what you're talking about, mile away, cloud of dust. And when they started having people who were coming to view the horses, that turned around within a couple of years.
Is that right? Wow.
And so now the McCullough Peaks horses are not as much
Not as flighty,
to ignore
maybe.
you as Anarchy, but they're definitely dartable distance. So that signage, people coming to view
Sure.
the horses, You know, if it's anything like the McCullough Peaks, it was really quite a, I mean, it really was miles away, cloud of dust, pronghorn running, horses running.
that
When I
right?
first came in 1994 to see that herd.
You know, we've actually had some BLM direction that has pretty much directed us saying, you know what, if you can dart horses, every state should be looking at HMAs and what's the applicability. So I think that the field they're looking at that. We just need to really emphasize that at the state level and keep doing what we can. Use all the tools we have.
Anybody else? All right. Gus, I want to thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you
you for the tour yesterday, and it was a pleasure hooking up with you again and spending some time with you. I always enjoy that.
You're welcome to Utah anytime.
All right, thank you very much. It's now 10 o'clock. Let's take a 15-minute break. Everybody be back on station by 10:15. Thank you all.